Hi everyone. Let's make a start. My name is Tom Creed. I'm a stage director of theatre and opera, and I'm on the steering committee of the National Campaign for the Arts. And we're delighted to be hosting this session today with our colleagues at Irish Equity and SIPTU and Theatre Forum. And this is, I guess, a response to a lot of queries that all of the various organisations have been receiving from artists and arts workers over the last few weeks around supports that are available for artists and arts workers during the current crisis. And so we've brought together some speakers today to give some of the information that we can about the various schemes, about how you're eligible, how to take advantage of the schemes, and to answer any questions that you might have. Just before we start, a few things. The meeting is being recorded so that we can make it available afterwards to people who weren't able to tune in live. We'll only be recording the contributions of the speakers, and we'll only be recording the video and not the chat. So it'd be great if you're happy to have your cameras on, because it's nice to see everybody's face. But obviously, if you would prefer not to for some reason, if you have children around you or in bed or haven't got dressed, that's okay. Everything's okay these days. We'll keep our microphones muted. If you have a question so the way this is going to run actually is that I'll introduce the three speakers, Karan, who from Irish Equity and SIPTU, who will give some insights into various supports that are available, followed by Peter Daly, actor and chartered accountant, and then Regina Baylor from the Tenancy Protection Service, who has some information for us about rent supports that are available. So if you have a question while the speakers are speaking, you can put it in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. And I'll put one or two questions to each of the speakers after they've made their contribution. But we'll have plenty of time at the end of the meeting for discussion and for people to ask things that are on your mind. When we get to that discussion, I'd appreciate if you could ask to speak by typing your name and either your organization or your area of practice into the chat window, and then I'll use the chat window as a kind of virtual hands in the air, and we'll call on people in the order that they've asked to speak in the chat window. We'll keep this, try and keep this to an hour if possible. This is my 7th meeting today in front of my computer, and our eyes will go square, and we'll try and be as efficient as we can about the information. We're also delighted that Mary Nash and some of her colleagues from the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht are on the call. They're listening in to get as much information as possible about how this situation is affecting artists and arts workers, and to hear what the issues are for artists and arts workers, so that they can take them back to the department, back to their colleagues in government and to the other departments, and hopefully that we can try and find a way of improving the situation for people who maybe are falling through the cracks on the various schemes or haven't found a way for the schemes to apply to them. So we're really grateful for Mary and her colleagues for being here with us. And I'm really grateful for the speakers for taking their time to speak to us today, and for so many of you to join us also in this strange and uncertain time. So maybe let's begin with Karan O'Loughlin. Karan, you represent SIPTU and Irish Equity, and you have some wisdom to impart about various supports that are available during these strange days. If you can unmute yourself and let us know what you know.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom. I hope that's not a stretch to say I have words of wisdom, but I certainly have some pieces of information that people might find useful. So during the session today, I'm going to talk specifically about the pandemic unemployment payment as it relates to PAYE workers, and talk a little bit about enhanced illness benefit and the self-isolation benefit, etc. and Peter will take up the piece afterwards on for the self-employed workers. So we're going to split it up that way. So just to say that during the session, I'll reference some website addresses and some telephone numbers and all that. So you don't need to worry about taking those down if you need that information, because what we will do is we will circulate all of the links and the phone numbers to everybody who registered at some stage after the meeting. So you don't need to do that. And I'm going to say a bit at the end of my address here, just about the types of problems that we've been encountering and the feedback that we've got from various artists and art workers around this whole COVID pandemic payment. So I'll start with the unemployment payment. So firstly, just to say who is covered for this payment. So this is a payment for either for people who were employed or self-employed and who were working immediately before or on the 13th of March and lost their job that they had on that day or immediately before that day as a direct result of COVID-19. So if you fit that criteria and you're a resident in the Republic of Ireland and you're under 66 and you have no income from your employment or self-employment and have an Irish bank account or post office account, then you qualify for that payment, right? It's a flat payment of €350 and it's for 12 weeks from the 24th of March. There had been a smaller payment previously for €203 from the 13th of March, but it was increased to €350. So anything payable from the 24th of March is at €350 flat for 12 weeks. So you can apply for that online at www.mywelfare.ie. If you don't have that facility or you don't want to do that, you can download and print the form from the government department www.gov.ie and /DEASP COVID-19. You don't need to take that down. We'll send that to you. And then you can return it in the free post envelope, or you can phone the helpline. We have some phone numbers that we'll circulate afterwards, or you can email form@welfare.ie and they'll post you out the form. But however, by far the quickest way to apply is to apply online through the link that we're going to send to you. So additionally, if you had been in employment and your employment days or hours were reduced, and if you had been working maybe 4 days or 5 days and you now are working 2 days or 3 days, you can still receive some support for the days that you're not working. That's a short-time work payment, which is €40.60 per day. And you can apply for that in the same way through the same links that we'll send you later on. So if you have applied for a payment and you haven't got it, there'll be only one of two reasons for that. Either your application has been rejected because or you have incorrect info, right? If it's rejected, sometimes you'll get a letter, sometimes not. You'll have to check because the volumes of people applying are huge. So, or else it's because there's incorrect info. So if you get feedback that you've been rejected because you just check your information that you submitted in the first place. And if you find you've made a mistake, just go on and immediately reapply. And if the second application has the correct information, then it will automatically be processed. But I would say as well that if you have, the 350 is the equivalent of social welfare payment for 2 adults, right, in a household. So if you have one dependent adult and one dependent child, or if you have at least 4 children, then the social welfare payment will be higher than 350. So you should make that application in the normal way, and you can do that online at the My Welfare, through the My Welfare website, and you'll get the 350 immediately, and then the money for the dependents will come later, but will be backdated to the date of your claim, because it's a higher payment, so under the normal job seekers form. So, and workers who are required to self-isolate will be entitled to an enhanced illness benefit, but you have to be medically qualified by your GP to be able to do that. So this is a payment of €350 a week for 2 weeks, provided that you are self-isolating for those 2 weeks, either at home or at a medical facility. And if you have an adult dependent, there's an additional €147 that you can claim for that. So in order to claim that, you need to request that your GP would submit a medical cert on your behalf. And you can go online to the My Welfare website and complete what they call the IB1 form, which is an illness benefit form. Or you can request it through the post in the ways that I've described earlier on. And if you find that you have been unfortunate enough to be actually diagnosed with COVID-19, then you apply in the same way, right? You get your doctor to medically certify you and to send in the cert. The doctor will send in the cert. You fill out or have somebody fill out the IB1 form online on your behalf if you're too ill. And this payment lasts for 10 weeks. Or for as long as you're medically diagnosed, right, by your doctor. So it can be longer in some cases, but there's a minimum confinement period of 2 weeks there. So if you're confined to the house for 2 weeks, but it will last it can last up to 10 weeks. And as I said, you apply in the same way. Now, there is a question mark over whether people who, if you're already on some form of illness benefit and you're diagnosed or have to self-isolate, it's unlikely that you'll qualify for the additional payment because you've already been on illness benefit up to that point. So if you are already in receipt of some sort of a payment, it could be if you're on a disability payment, or if you are on maybe a lone parent payment, and you're working as well, and you've lost that additional work because of COVID-19, you should still apply for the COVID-19 payment. Now, your additional income, whether it's a disability payment or a lone parent payment, will be adjusted to account for the additional payments, but you should still apply. So that's, I suppose, in a nutshell, that's the big picture stuff. And the types of problems that we're coming across most frequently, right? People who are being excluded from the payments, or who are not qualifying for the payments, are people who would have been due to take up work. So even if it was, even if you were due to start maybe the day after the shutdown, or if you were working on a production that had to shut down very early on in the when the social distancing measures came into place, then if you hadn't actually started your work, even if there was only a couple of days in the difference, you won't qualify for any of those payments because you weren't actually working at the cutoff point of the 13th of March. That's the single biggest complaint we're having from PAYE people. There are some other complaints where people had been on self-employment work, but they were already on a reduced payment because they didn't have enough stamps, and they're not qualifying. People with future work, people who had work planned maybe into the summer with festivals and other events that were to happen, they're not qualifying for payment. And anybody who's over 66. And the over 66 problem tends to be with performers like actors and musicians who tend to work to a really good age. So they're not qualifying either. So I suppose the biggest complaint from these groups of people who are not qualifying is, I suppose, their sense of invisibility and their sense of unimportance. And they feel like, you know, if I was 21 and working in the spar shop, I would probably get this payment. But I have been a practicing professional for years and years, and now I feel like I've just been on the trash heap. And it's very difficult for people to survive financially. The information that we're getting is that people are nosediving financially at a very rapid rate. So that's the big picture stuff. I hope I haven't gone through it too quickly, but we do only have a certain amount of time. And I am very happy to take the questions maybe whenever the moderator decides it's appropriate to put them. Thank you.
Great, thanks a million, Karan. I might bring Peter in now, and actually, because then I think there's some questions that are coming in already, but which I'll put to both of you actually. So Peter, maybe if you could follow on from what Karan has spoken about, anything else you have to add in terms of the PAYE work and the COVID payment, and also how it relates to self-employed practitioners.
Sure. Hi everyone. Hope everyone's doing okay in this very, very strange time. To introduce myself for people who don't already know me, I work as an actor, but I also work as an accountant, and I do at least some of your tax returns. So I feel I'm well placed to know just how tough working as an artist in this country was before the COVID pandemic. I know how people struggle to make ends meet as it is, and how few of us have a safety net or any type of funds built up to kind of get us through these difficult times. So I can imagine just how stressful this is, and I hope everyone's doing okay. So Karan has taken us through what it is, how it is to apply for the COVID pandemic payment, the pandemic unemployment payment, if you're a PAYE worker. I'm going to go through it as a self-employed person. You can apply as either PAYE or as self-employed. When you look at the form, you'll see that it looks for an employer name and address. Just put your own name and your own address. It'll look for the date that you finished work. Just put down that you've ceased employment or ceased self-employment from the date you ceased. So that would probably be in or around the 13th of March. It might be useful to kind of go back and say, well, what is a self-employed person? And I think there's something quite instructive in social welfare's instructions about being self-employed. And it says, you need to have been self-employed, your trading income has to have ceased, but you do not need to deregister as self-employed to get a payment. So what they're talking about there is you don't need to deregister from revenue to get a self-employed payment. So that means you need to have been registered with revenue as a self-employed person. People who have non-PAYE work of 5 grand or more after expenses have an obligation to register as self-employed with revenue. It's called register for income tax. So you might have a situation where you've been doing this all along anyway, and you can have a blend of, say for example, particularly as an actor, you might go from a PAYE job to some self-employed work, like maybe an ad or a couple of days in a film that you got a fee for, or a reading that you got a fee for rather than being run through payroll. So you can easily be both at the same time. There's no problem with that. And the way you reconcile it all up at the end of the year is you do a Form 11 tax return, which includes your PAYE income and also your self-employed income. So you might have a situation, as I said, that you've been doing this all along and it's all quite straightforward. Or you might have a situation where you started trading, say in 2018 or 2019, or even at the start of 2020, but you haven't done anything about it yet. I often have people come to me, say in June of 2020, say for example, they might come to me and say, well, actually I started trading as a self-employed person at the start of 2019 and I haven't done anything about it. What's the next step? And what I do at that stage is I register them for income tax from the 1st of January 2019. So there's no problem going and doing that now if you have trading income in 2019, or even if theoretically you've had trading income early in 2020, you can still go back and register for income tax with revenue. And the way you do that is, if you have a My Account login, there's a little box down the homepage that's it says manage tax registrations, something like that. Could be just tax registrations, and you go in and you click register for income tax. Now obviously this is for people who haven't done it yet already. Anybody who's already has me as an accountant or another person's accountant has done that in the background anyway. So don't worry if you're kind of wondering, well, I never did that. Maybe an accountant did it for you. So that's, or you might have done it by a paper form, which is called a TR1. So basically, if you're wondering if I qualified as a self-employed person because I haven't actually done anything with revenue yet, you can go and tidy that up today and possibly apply for the payment on Monday or Tuesday of next week. Revenue have, social welfare have given a page that you can link through. If you go to the COVID-19 pandemic unemployment payment, they have a link to what happens if you're self-employed. And I find that there's a sentence there that I find very instructive. And it says, you may, if your trading income has collapsed to the extent that you're unable to take up, that you're available to take up other full-time employment, if it was offered to you, you may receive the payment of $350 per week, as long as you're available to take up other work. So that answers the question to me of what if you've got like a little bit of income dribbling in, a very small amount, you know, much lower than your normal level of self-employed income. I mean, they say it in a few places it needs to have ceased completely, but they also say collapse to the extent that you're available to take up other full-time work. So I don't know, make of that what you will, but to me that means there could be income dribbling in that's to do with either the period before you stop trading or just a little bit that comes in on a regular basis anyway. Maybe you've got royalties coming in from some direction. People have asked me the question, what if you did some work in January, February, March before you ceased, but you haven't sent out that invoice yet? Well, to me, that's relating to the period before you cease trading. And to me, what you would do to rectify that is send the invoice and date it in the period you were doing the work. We often do that. You might send out an invoice dated last week because you meant to send it out last week and you haven't done it yet. I don't think that's an issue. And I could argue that one with revenue. It isn't an issue if you find yourself in a situation like that. Some people have talked about the idea of kind of continuing to get some PAYE, but relying on your self-employed to get the pandemic payment, I don't think that's a goer, to be honest, unless people want to come and talk to me about that, that they have done that and they seem to be still getting it. My feeling is that you have to have no PAYE income, even if it's just a small amount. And I don't know, maybe that's about negotiating with somebody who's still paying you some money for work you were supposed to do, of just kind of structuring it in such a way that it doesn't get in the way of this payment. That's kind of more or less it from a self-employed point of view. You do it in the same way. You apply through mygovid.ie. If you don't have a mygovid.ie login, it's very easy to get one. You don't have to have a verified account to apply for the COVID pandemic unemployment payment. If you don't have a My Account login, you can get one very easy as well. If you have a P60 from last year, well, they don't do P60s anymore, but if you've got some type of pay information from 2019 and a driver's license, they'll text the password to you, and otherwise they send it out by post. So I think that's about it from me. I'll be happy to take any questions on anything that I haven't covered through Tom later on in the session.
Brilliant. I'm going to just pass on a few questions from the chat now, Karan and Peter, if you can unmute yourselves and see if we can deal with a few of these. A question from David Pierce: does the payment include people who were, say, for example, working twice a week, facilitating 2 different workshops prior to the work being cancelled? I guess that depends on the nature of the employment, right?
Yeah, exactly. If that was self-employed work, then I imagine that person is registered as self-employed, or possibly is thinking of registering as self-employed, and in which case they should get it on that basis.
But if it was PAYE work and it stopped, then they'd also be eligible, right? Like if they were doing it up to the point where it stopped. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, as long as there was a payroll was run in the period up to the 13th of March that covered the period from the start of February to the middle of March, I think it is. As long as you're on a payroll then and no longer on that payroll, you should be okay. Also, I've heard back from some people that they went and applied for the payment, but they didn't get it because they're still registered as an employee with someone or other. The way you rectify that is you can go on to My Account or onto your ROS login and just cease all employments from a particular date. For example, you did some work with RTE during 2018 even. They often keep you on their payroll. They don't release you from their payroll, even though there might be no tax credit sitting, but you're still technically registered on their payroll. You can get rid of that by ceasing that employment. That's a fairly new thing. That wasn't available, say, a year ago or until the start of 2019 when PAYE modernisation came in.
A question, does anyone know the time frame on a response from the welfare department? How long should you wait with no answer? I know in my experience, I didn't hear anything for about 2.5 weeks, and then the payment ended up in my account. And actually, I wondered whether it was to the crack. So I did actually send the application in twice.
Yes, I have a bit of background on that. It should be, basically what they've said is if you apply for the payment by today, Friday the 17th, you should get your payment on the 21st, which is Tuesday. If you don't, something is probably wrong. And you might maybe take a look at the application. Maybe you took a screen grab from the MyGov, or you have a copy of your form. Go back, look at it, and there's no harm in applying for it again. You won't get a double payment. They've said that already, because they'll tie things up with the PPS numbers. So if you haven't got it by Tuesday, my instinct is go back and apply for it again straight away. Maybe leave it to close of business on Tuesday evening. Also, there was another thing as well. One of the issues they're coming across is that people are putting a bank account number in instead of an IBAN. The IBAN is, I can't remember, is it 22 digits, 16 digits? 16? But yeah, so just go back and apply for it straight away. If you've been waiting for a while and it hasn't come in yet, then my feeling is, and something in this discussion has helped you to kind of go, oh shit, I put that in wrong. I would just go back and apply for it straight away today.
Great.
Under normal circumstances, if you can get it in before the run on the Thursday and it doesn't arrive by the Tuesday, there's a problem.
Okay,
it was a bit slower in the beginning because the numbers were so big, and revenue were still adjusting. But right now, I think if you have it in on a Thursday and it's not there on Tuesday, then check it out immediately.
Great, thanks. Can everyone keep their mics muted, please? Just there's a little bit of feedback coming through there if you're not speaking. Thanks. A question from El Conroy. If your dependent has also lost their job in the arts, do you both apply for COVID?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Someone who was self-employed and also employed by doing part-time work, and they're still being paid for the part-time work. So technically, they're not entitled to the COVID payment, right?
That's my instinct. Yes. Yeah, that's my understanding of it. Yeah.
Great. A question about, is there any info yet on what's going to happen to the payment after the 12 weeks? I mean, I can say that at the moment, there is no information about that. NCFA and the various other resource organisations are in constant dialogue with the department, who are also listening on the call. And, you know, we're aware of the reality that due to social distancing, you know, the arts and culture might be closed down for quite a while. And we might not be gathering in our venues for quite a while. There's not a sense yet of what is going to happen, but that case is being made by everybody who can. Mark Cullen has a point. Is it not fair to say that many artists are almost always working regardless of whether they're getting paid for it? And I think, Peter, that's exactly your point, isn't it? That you're self-employed all the time.
Yeah.
Until it becomes...
Exactly. That trade is running all year long. And there are times when you might dip out of the trade to do a PAYE job. But as far as I'm concerned, the trade is always running in the background. We all know of actors who, and other artists who, you know, might leave a rehearsal room where they're a PAYE worker at 6 o'clock in the evening and go off and do something else where it's self-employed that evening, a voiceover or a concert or whatever else. So yeah, that trade is running all year round.
There's a few more questions coming in again about what's going to be happening in the next quarter, what's happening later in the year, if you've planned projects in festivals. Again, this is a wait and see. This is, in a way, it's a little bit beyond the answers that we have in this meeting, but this is, you know, the letters that the NCFA and Equity and other Theatre Forum and other agencies have been sending to the department are all about this. So this is something that we're continuing to work on and we'll update people on. Are there discussions planned with government officials regarding those workers who may not have been employed prior to COVID-19 and are therefore ineligible for the emergency payments? There are discussions happening with government, and I think this is in a way the area where it seems like people are falling between the cracks. So someone who would have been on a PAYE contract, say as an actor or a stage manager, that finished a few weeks before the lockdown and was due to start another contract around now, but technically because they were on job seekers at the moment where the doors closed, that's how they're treated by revenue. And this is an issue that we're aware of, and this is something that we're engaging with the department with. And I would say the department are providing a help desk to assist people with these kind of issues. And I think if you're having these kind of issues, it's really important that you send the information to the department, because that's how the department can count the number of people that are actually being affected by this issue, so that it's not only anecdotal, but that there's actually data in the inboxes.
Yeah, can I just come in for a second, Tom, just on that point, right? Because I think that it's very important that we kind of realize, and everybody that we're talking to realizes, that the arts and culture sector is not a sector that can immediately bounce back. That production and festivals and events, because of the social distancing for one, but because of the time it takes to bring a project from its creation and development to actual work for artists, can be quite long. So that period is going to be protracted. So what we have done, along with other organisations, is we've asked government for something very specific. We've asked that the current self-employed artist scheme be extended to all artists and arts workers, and that it be lifted to the level of the COVID-19 payment. So it could be managed within that vehicle, and because the industry will take so much longer to recover, that maybe we could have a discussion then with government about how that gets phased out over a longer period of time, given the very specific needs of that particular industry. So we're really asking them to understand the challenges that are there for workers in the industry. So I just think it's important that people would know that that's the kind of discussion we're having for those sort of immediate supports. Obviously, there's a longer term conversation about how the arts are supported into the future, but for the immediate crisis, that's the sort of thing that we're focusing on, and asking the government to implement the copyright directive for anybody who has IP rights, because the EU copyright directive gives more support to the IP rights and it's better support to enable artists to sort of develop other income streams. So that's kind of where that conversation is at the moment.
Great. A question from Dorothy Leahy. Is there any way to confirm with the department around disability and lone parents? Someone did an application for self-employed unpermitted work for disabled and was told nobody on disability or lone parent can get the COVID payment because it's an instead payment.
Okay, so the information that I have is directly from the Department of Social Welfare, right? And what they're saying is that if you are on a payment and you lose work because of the payment, then you can apply for the payment. Now there will be some adjustment to your existing payment that you're on, but you certainly can apply. I had no information that suggests that anybody who is on any sort of disability payment would be automatically excluded when they're on, especially if they're on a permitted work scheme. I've no information, but it's something that we can check separately. Yeah.
Great. I might just take a pause there I will come back to these questions, and there's a lot of really good questions coming in, but I might bring Regina in just to talk a little bit about rent support and what's going on. And Regina, if you can unmute yourself there and let us know what you can tell us about the rent supports that are available.
Good afternoon all. So my name is Regina Baylor. I work in Threshold. I'm the Assistant Manager of the Tenancy Protection Service. Now what we have seen the last couple of weeks is a huge amount of people looking for rent supplement. Rent supplement was, it filtered out there about 2 years ago. Everybody now must go on HAP. But because of the emergency and the lack of income coming into properties, then there is a short-term rent supplement form that we have that we can send out to anybody who needs it. Now, rent supplement would be where is that you have lost, your income has gone down and that you need to pay your rent. This is a much shortened rent supplement application than the original one was. You can actually put it in to the Department of Social Protection without the landlord signing it or giving the details, just to start your claim, and then you have a few weeks to get in the necessary information. You might notice as well that under the new emergency legislation, nobody is allowed to serve a notice of termination from the 27th of March till at least the 27th of June. That might be extended. We're not aware of it yet. Also, no rent increases that are due to come into play between the 27th of March and the 27th of June. The rent is not to go up. It's like that, it's paused. But with a notice of termination, if you have received a notice of termination prior to the emergency legislation, then your notice, if it's valid, is literally paused for 3 months. So that gives some people an extra 3 months to find another property. What we would say to everybody that if they have a reduction in income would be to contact Threshold straight away. We have a free phone number. It's 1800 454 454. We're on the phones from 9 in the morning until 9 at night, Monday to Friday. And you can email us at advicecork@threshold.ie. Now, if there's any issues with rent arrears, the landlord can send you a warning letter, but he cannot send the following notice of termination. Just be aware that if you do get in rent arrears, apart from the moratorium now, you've only 6 weeks really to vacate the property. So just call us before you get into rent arrears. Now, going back to the rent supplement. For a single person living in a property, usually their rent supplement contribution every week would be around €32. Now, the rent supplement cap would be kind of $550 for a 1-bedroom apartment, which there are no 1-bedroom apartments anymore, $550. But what we can do if you contact us is that we can actually get onto the Department of Social Protection and look for an Article 38 for you, for the few weeks that you need it, to bring their contribution right up to the amount that you actually need to cover your rent. What I would say, as again, to everybody, if you have any issues with your tenancy, please call us. Don't delay by calling us. Just call us straight away, and at least we will be able to get on to your landlord or the GSP or the council if you're in receipt of HAP, and we will be able to ask them to either recalculate your rent or to look for an Article 38 and rent supplement for you.
Great, thanks so much. There's a lot of questions coming in about links and numbers and things, and we will send out all links and numbers and some fact sheets and things to everybody on Monday. So we'll, if you've missed something, we'll make sure that all that information is passed on. I'll ask a few more questions. Just a couple of comments here. Someone reminding everyone to be sure to say that you cease trading on the 13th or after, or you won't qualify, so that you needed to have ceased trading, or on the 12th, I guess, which is the day of the announcement. Peter, is that accurate? You're muted.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Someone with a comment saying that they spoke to someone in the DESP and they said that even if you're earning as little as €20, you're not entitled to the payment.
And is that €20 PAYE or self-employed?
I'm not sure, and maybe John, who's asked that question, you might comment in the chat, and I'll get back to it. Does anyone know for definite that the COVID payment will be deducted from the one-parent family payment as an overpayment, like other freelance income?
I think so. It says that the COVID-19 pandemic unemployment payment will replace your employment income and will be regarded by the DESP as equivalent to employment income. And that's in relation to a section about the one-parent family payment. There's more about that on citizens' information. And I remember at the time going through into that, and that there's a good bit of detail on that. Great. To the best of my knowledge, it is. It's treated as the same type of income, but because it's quite low, it shouldn't have as much of an impact as, say, a higher payment through an employment income.
Great.
Can I just say, Tom, just to re-emphasize the point that the Citizens Information website has really, really useful information for people on this who want to double check various situations. It's very helpful, so we might include that in the links that we send around.
Brilliant. Someone who's registered as self-employed and has been receiving 410 from a theatre company because the play was cancelled until today, which is the end of the contract. When they're filling out the form, should they say cease trading on the 13th of March, or should they say cease trading today?
They were in an employment. That 410 is obviously the temporary wage support subsidy that Revenue are paying. My instinct is that that's going to pop up when they apply.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I think that because they would have been in receipt of income, and if it's a play, it's likely to have been, may have been PAYE. Yeah. But if it's PAYE, then you become unemployed from the day that payment ceases. Okay. If it's PAYE, you would have been in receipt of some income all the time, so that would have excluded you. Or sorry, if it's self-employed, it would have excluded you because you're getting some income. To qualify as self-employed, as Peter said, your income from your self-employment has to have ceased or almost ceased. Yeah.
Thanks. Is there any problem if you're registered as self-employed but not making any money from your practice? I think
it's a really good question, and it's one that I've kind of been discussing with myself over the last while. Like, you can see a situation where somebody starts trading as an artist or a plumber or an accountant at the start of a year with the best of intentions, and they register with Revenue and they get themselves a website and stuff like that. And then the COVID thing happens and they haven't quite got stuff off the ground, or income hasn't come in. But that person, to my mind, is technically self-employed. You know, it takes a while to build a business, to kind of get your name out there and so forth. So yeah, and somebody, so my answer is that Revenue might come back and start poking and prodding, or social welfare might come back and start poking and prodding to see was there bona fide self-employed activity going on. If you got through the COVID and then started generating some self-employed and that showed up in your 2020 income tax return, my feeling is that that wouldn't be an issue. Someone else asked a question, and it kind of ties in a little bit. They referenced the $5,000 I mentioned. I only mentioned the $5,000 because that's Revenue's rule. That's who has to register for income tax. But you often see people registering for income tax before they hit that $5,000 mark, because that's the intention. So, and that person had asked, what if they made $5,000 or more in 2018 and less than that in 2019? I'm presuming they have been registered as self-employed the whole time, so I don't think that will necessarily show up as that much of a blip. And in actual fact, If you went for the job seekers benefit as a self-employed person, it's back to 2018 they look to make sure that you've got the requisite number of PRSI stamps. And as long as you have 5 grand or more in self-employed income in any year, you find you pay that minimum 500 euro PRSI payment. That gives you 52 Class S contributions. I've thrown a lot of figures at you there now, but basically I wouldn't worry too much about the level of income for now. That's not to say that they won't come back and go, listen, we now have the time to go back and see, was this a legitimate self-employed and so forth at some stage in the future.
Right. There's a couple of questions about artists who were abroad at the beginning of the lockdown and have now returned home and find themselves being asked to return payments or being made ineligible because they weren't here at the beginning of the period. How does that work?
I think I see Karen's about to jump in as well. My understanding is that you need to live in the Republic of Ireland. That's the one line they gave you in as one of the rules. Live in the Republic of Ireland. Now, what does that mean? I can tell you what tax residency is. Is it the same thing? I'm not 100% sure. But my instinct is that if you have perhaps done self-employed tax returns over the last couple of years and happen to be abroad for a stint, and your trade is still technically ongoing in Ireland, your trade as an artist or as an arts worker, and you're applying with an Irish PPS number and an Irish address, my feeling is that that might be okay. Karen?
I think that if you travelled for a particular event or a particular piece of work, and that work was cancelled or it just naturally finished and then you came back again, then I think that you're okay to apply. If you were resident abroad and have returned now, because there's no work anyplace and you just have to return, then the chances are that you won't be eligible, but you can apply for the means tested PAYE social protection payment, or if you're a self-employed artist and you have generated income from that self-employment over the last 12 months or so, you could try applying for the self-employed artist scheme. Now that is means tested. And it is at the normal rate of unemployment benefit or unemployment, what's the other one? It's the allowance. And it is means tested, but it's better than no income whatsoever.
The opposite question, someone who's been employed in PAYE here, but had to move back to, say, Northern Ireland because their work ended. So they've been working full-time and paying PAYE here, but their main address is not here.
Okay, they're what's referred to as frontier workers, and they're not covered because their place of residence is outside the Republic of Ireland. I know they might have been working and paying taxes here, but they're not resident in the Republic of Ireland, so they're definitely not covered. So they should... They have to claim in their own territory. Like if they move back to Northern Ireland, they'll have to claim from the UK government scheme. Okay, great. A question which I think was answered earlier, does this benefit apply to people over 66? The answer is no. No, it actually applies once you hit 66, then you're disqualified. Okay, as far as I know, but definitely not over 66 anyway. You have to be between 18 and 66 to get the benefit. Great. Someone who's working on a production and signed off from welfare to do the job worked 2 of 3 days. They were put on payroll, and then when it was cancelled, they were put back on job seekers. Are they entitled to the 350? Let's say that again. So someone who was working on a production and signed off from welfare to do the job, they worked 2 of the 3 days on the job and were put on payroll, and then the production was cancelled. So they were put back. Oh yeah, reapply. Reapply, absolutely, reapply. Great. Another question about, they said it would last for the payment would last for 6 weeks, and then people would have to apply for job seekers. Now they're saying it will last longer. Should we still be applying for job seekers, or should we wait?
My instinct on that is to hold off and see what happens. You'll get another couple of prompts, I think, before anything happens. Job seekers, the idea, what we're all hoping is that we get to a stage and we start to slowly get back to work. And I mean, for more traditional businesses, that's probably very straightforward. A pub opens its door and it takes back on its staff. For us, it's going to take longer because social distancing, etc. But I think that the idea behind the payment is that you apply for job seekers. I mean, I know it gives you a pop-up message at the end saying you must apply for job seekers, but that's for continuing support after this is over, to the best of my knowledge. So my instinct is that hold off on that until you absolutely have to. My fear is that they then start looking into eligibility for your job seekers, and they find perhaps that you don't have any stamps paid in 2018, and they try to do something then. I don't know for sure, I'm being slightly anecdotal, but my instinct is to hold off until you have to apply for job seekers. Karen, I don't know.
Agree.
Yeah.
I would agree, because I think the government will make a statement towards the, as it moves towards the end of the 12-week period, because it does say in all the documentation that the payment is for 12 weeks, but may be extended, but that will be a government decision, and it'll be fairly well publicized. So yeah, I would agree with Peter there that you should hold off until we actually know what the post 12-week situation is going to be.
Great. If you've been declined for the COVID-19 payment because of an error, will it be back paid?
If your claim it will be backdated to the date of your original claim, if you had made a mistake. So what you would do is, if you made a mistake and it took 2 weeks and then you had to reapply, I think once you get paid, they will deal with arrears at a later date, but you will be paid from your date of eligibility.
Great. But I'm right in thinking that the system is only able to pay people a week at a time. So people who are getting back paid, that will be paid at the end rather than on your first payment.
I think the payments are fortnightly, but yeah, they're dealing with immediate payment now and arrears or overpayments even at a later date.
Great. I think the COVID payment is weekly. Job seekers has gone fortnightly, but at the COVID payment.
Yeah, there are some other payments. I think probably other social welfare payments have switched to fortnightly because of the administration situation.
Great. If you were always registered as self-employed and had taken up a part-time postgraduate course, which is now online, are you still eligible?
And are you getting paid for the part-time?
That's not clear.
Yeah. I think if you're getting paid for it, and particularly if you're getting paid as a PAYE person, you're probably not eligible.
I think it's more about someone who is now part-time a student.
Oh, I see. Not a paid PhD. Sorry. Look, any of these supports, I suppose you have to follow the rule. Is your trade still going? Is that individual's trade still going in the background, and has it ceased? And are they technically available to do other stuff? That's what the bottom line with any of these job seekers payments. You're available to do stuff, to take on another job. My instinct is that if that person has a trade and it was still going and has ceased because of COVID, they should still be eligible.
Great, but that's as a result of the employment ceasing, not about their course going online. Right?
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Here's a question which a lot of people have been asking. If someone was to apply for one of the funding schemes, so the Culture Ireland Facebook Fund, the Arts Council COVID Response Fund, or the recently announced IMRO First Music Contact Award for Musicians, how does that affect their ability to receive welfare payments? Okay,
well, in relation to the Arts Council payment, when it was announced first, there was a note in the guidance that says if you got the $3,000 payment, you wouldn't be eligible for the pandemic unemployment payment. And I think about a week later, that wording changed, saying that it wasn't as black and white, and it said you needed to discuss with your social welfare case officer. So my instinct on that is that if you got the $3,000, and I know you're not allowed to use the $3,000 to buy equipment or stuff like that, but if you got the $3,000 and it was used to cover the costs of having to do the online presentation, and it whittled down to a much lower, let's call it a much lower taxable amount, then I still feel that you might be able to put your hand on your heart and say, my trading income has collapsed to the extent that if I was available, if full-time work came up, I would take it. So, because that $3,000 could easily be whittled down. That's my instinct on the whole thing. It's not, my feeling is it's not quite black and white. All of the other awards, I think, are more for even smaller amounts. I don't know about the IMRO one, sorry. The Culture Ireland one is for a smaller amount. Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Great. Some questions, a bunch of questions about people who were on job seekers at a rate on or below 203 and had work that was due to start in April. Is there any way of that being boosted to the 350 payment because of the lost work?
At this point in time, the answer is no. And that's something that we are actively seeking from the government, but the answer, unfortunately, at this time is no.
Great, and I think just
ahead.
on that, people should contact the department for advice about that, and I think that's something that it's important that the department hears about, because it's a particular, there's something about the particular seasonal nature of arts work where I think people are being affected.
And I would say that if people are doing pieces of work, right, if pieces of PAYE work, you can still continue to claim if you don't qualify for COVID-19 and you're doing pieces of work, maybe, and you're getting paid for a certain amount of hours a week, you can still claim for the other days that you're not working, right? So you claim it short time working benefit. It's 40 euros and some cents, 60 cents or something for each day that you're not working. So you're not disqualified from support just because you're doing a few hours paid work during the week.
Just from the COVID-19 payment.
Yeah, you're disqualified from COVID-19, but you're not disqualified from the short-time working support. It's a small payment, but it's something. And if you don't qualify for anything COVID-19 related, and you're just getting the bare 203 and you're really struggling, you can apply for a means-tested supplementary allowance or an urgent or exceptional needs payment from your local Intrio office. And I have again another link with all the list of the Intrio offices on it that I will supply in the bulk information after this. Now, it is hard to get that payment, and I won't lie to you, it is hard to get, but if you find yourself in those circumstances, do apply for it, because all of these numbers that are applying, it definitely gives the government a better view of what's happening out there.
Great. I'm going to try and get through as many of these questions as possible. We might run just a couple of minutes over, if that's okay. Self-employment question: if you earned less than 5,000 in 2019 but more than 5,000 in 2018, are you eligible for the COVID unemployment payment?
My feeling is that that person sounds like they're self-employed. Again, the £5,000 is just what revenue calls what's a chargeable person who has to register for income tax. My feeling is that that person should be okay because they're registered as self-employed.
Great. A question from someone who was not registered self-employed but had not applied for social welfare. What can they do to get some payment? Can they, if they're not registered as self-employed and they're not...
But they're working as self-employed, are they? Are they working as self-employed?
Yeah, they're working on a project ad hoc basis.
And perhaps not earning a huge amount of money, and that's why they haven't registered as self-employed.
Yeah, and maybe their partner was working, but now they've lost work.
My instinct is that if they're not registered as self-employed, they're not going to get the COVID pandemic payment as a self-employed person. And if they weren't in employment, they're not going to get as a PAYE worker. So I think that their only solution is to go in and look for job seekers allowance, which is them looking for a support from social welfare with not enough credits in the past. So in other words, that's the one you get if you don't have enough either PAYE credits or now self-employed credits built up.
And it is means tested.
And it is means tested, yeah. I see a question as well, just it's an easy one to answer. What's the difference between self-employed and self-assessed? The self-assessed is just the system, it's the self-assessment system. When you do a tax return, it's self-assessment, which means you could put whatever you like into it and they probably won't check it, but they might. So it's a self-assessment. They're not going to assess it for you. And obviously a self-employed person has to go through the self-assessment process and file a return. Hope that's helpful.
Right. Peter, if you can leave me do the questions because you're jumping ahead and there's many more questions before that one to get to. So here's a comment from somebody who was refused the COVID payment for being on job seekers allowance. They contacted the social welfare payment who have suspended their claim and told them to apply for the COVID payment again. So that's an interesting thing to hear. It'd be interesting to see. Thumbs up from Peter Daly. Has the self-employment dole scheme been widened beyond visual artists and writers yet?
Yeah, yes, it has. Yeah, there is. There's a list. There are actors, musicians. I think some set designers or set decorators. Or there is a whole list. I'll add that to the list of information that we need to circulate.
Brilliant. The question: should we be on job seekers if we're still getting part-time payment, even though we'd be worse off than if we were on the COVID payment?
No, I would say if you are doing part-time work, then if you have lost other work, no, if you're doing part-time work, if it's a couple of days a week, then apply for the short-term working if your hours have reduced as a consequence of COVID-19, and you would normally be in full-time work, but now you're doing part-time work, then you can apply for the short-term work scheme. If you just are in part-time work because you've always been in part-time work and it's the same amount of hours, then there's no other payment that applies to you.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's the question, and this is a little bit the issue that has come up during the week around the news agents giving out that their staff have quit to go on the COVID payment because they're being paid less than the COVID payment.
Yeah, that's under the temporary wage scheme, the wage support scheme.
Okay.
And that has changed in the last few days. So now there's a minimum payment. So it's either 70% of your net pay or 350.
Okay.
So the floor has been raised now to 350 for that scheme.
Here's someone who is self-employed and in receipt of the COVID payment. They've lost income. One company has confirmed today that they will pay them a partial fee for work that was meant to be scheduled at the end of April. Do they need to come off the COVID payment, or will they be penalised if they don't? They're self-employed.
My instinct on that one is that that's work for the period that was done before your trade ceased, and I'd have no problem sending out an invoice dated the 12th of March for that work and marking clearly on it. I know that, we shouldn't do that, but I think I would have no problem doing that. I wouldn't come off the payment.
Yeah, great. I'm trying to, what is this? I'm not quite sure. I think we probably answered that already. And we've answered about the bursaries from the Arts Council. But I think if you have any awards or bursaries from the Arts Council, it sort of depends on, like, that is income, and it just depends on where you declare it. Or, like I'm right in saying, Peter, say if you get a bursary from the Arts Council, but the work that you do on that bursary is all going to take place at the end of the year, then that doesn't rule you out of, like, you can, if you don't start trading again until the end of the year, then that's fine.
Yeah, I feel that's fine. I mean, I have clients from time to time who might come to me and they've just got a bursary and they might get it in December and they might draw down the whole amount, but they're planning activity and costs in relation to that, travel or whatever that might be, getting people in a room to work something out. And I would have no problem deferring that income from the tax year we're looking at to the following tax year. And I think it's the same if you have a bursary either sitting in your bank account or about to be paid down to you. It's for the period after your trade has picked up again.
Great. There's a bunch of questions around kind of support for arts organizations and around artists' workspaces and studio rental, which I think doesn't exactly come under the auspices of what we're talking about. Obviously, NCFA and all the other organizations are making strong cases for the support that are needed in terms of organizations that have lost income, in terms of and stabilization funding. I think this question of are artist studio rents eligible for supplements or reductions during the lockdown? Does the notice of termination and rent apply to artist studios? And because artists are being charged for their studio rental, even though the buildings have been closed since the 13th of March and can't even get into their studios to take their materials out. I think that's something that Visual Artists Ireland are working on. I don't know if that's a welfare issue, but there might be something, if anyone has any insights into that.
If they wanted to send us their lease into Threshold, we could have a look at it. If there's a break clause or if the contract has been frustrated over the COVID-19, we could have a look at it and see, is there anything we could do about it with the landlord? Great,
that's interesting. So artists who are having this issue with studios, maybe let's see if Threshold can help. Can you apply for rent supplement while you're waiting for HAP?
Usually not, but if it's in relation to the COVID-19 and there's a severe loss of income, I'd say yes. The issues with HAP is, number one, that it takes quite a while to process it, and the reason for that is that sometimes the landlords will not sign either the HAP forms or the rent supplement forms. Now that is discrimination, and we can help bring the landlord to the Workplace Relations Committee with that and look for damages for the client. But at the moment, the rent supplement is kind of been expedited. So I would say go push in an application and see what happens.
Great. The question, another rent question. Someone lease renewed this month, and just before the lockdown, they had agreed a small increase with the landlord. Does the freeze on increases apply to that?
Okay.
And how long will the freeze last? How long and when will the landlords be able to increase rent again?
Yeah. Now, number one, an increase in the lease is not a valid rent review. A valid rent review must give you 90 days notice of the rent review, and it must give you 3 comparable properties, and it must tell you that you can challenge it to the RTB within those 90 days. This thing about giving you a lease every 1 or 2 years and putting a higher amount of rent, that they're not valid. We had a case there last year, one of my own clients, and we were able to negotiate over €10,000 funds back. It was an overpayment of rent. It's just that the landlord every year or 2 years came along with a new lease with a higher amount. That is not a valid rent increase. The valid rent is only the amount that was at the start of the lease, if that landlord keeps on doing that. So you could have a situation where you might have moved in 2012 and your rent might have been €600 a month. It is now maybe 1,500, and the only way the landlord increased it was by giving you a new lease. Well, the valid rent is the initial rent. So if anybody has ever signed a lease every year but not got a valid rent review, then contact us and we look for the overpayment to be returned to you.
Fantastic. A couple of more things. A bunch of musicians who are on the COVID pavement but are still being paid about €150 a month from music generation to do a couple of hours a week. Do they need to
rent supplement? They're entitled to rent supplement.
Great. And this is a question about the COVID payment for Peter and for Karan. So if they're getting about 150 a month to do a few hours a week for music generation, should they resign from that work to get to keep the COVID benefit?
No, if you resign from work, you automatically disqualify yourself from the payment. What you need to do in those situations is to see what sort of additional support. So if it's 150 a month for a few hours a week, what is that? Is that 1 day a week, and are you unemployed for the other days? So you need to see what sort of assistance would suit you best, but definitely don't resign because you'll automatically disqualify yourself.
Is the COVID-19 payment taxable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Revenue have indicated it's taxable. Now, what usually social welfare payments don't get hit with PRSI or USC, so it's just looking. So those are the second and third taxes. Those are the lower rate taxes. So it just gets hit with the income tax, which is the first, and that doesn't kick in till you earn about roughly. It depends on the breakdown of your income, but roughly about 16.5 grand. So if your year is obliterated and that's the only payment you get is 350 and then a little bit, you mightn't end up paying tax, but technically it's taxable.
Thanks.
And can I just say, Tom, if anybody is on the wage subsidy scheme that we mentioned earlier, what they're getting now is a net payment without any deductions, but they will pay tax on that in the future. So what Revenue have said is that can be settled in one of two ways. If people have cash and they want to pay a settlement at the end of the year, that's fine, but it's more likely that it will be subject to adjustments in your tax credits across the duration of 2021.
Okay, great. Here's a question from someone who runs a venue. If a venue has committed, as many venues have, to paying all of the artists and facilitators that they have employed over the period, are they hampering with the person's ability to apply for the pandemic unemployment payment?
I think it depends on how they pay it and when they pay it.
I think that's clear, yeah.
Yeah. If there's a way of stalling it and paying it at some stage after this is all over, that would be better.
Yeah, and it depends. Yeah, and it depends on how the payment is structured, because if it's payment for work already done, then Peter's made that point already. If it's payment for future work, then it needs to be. If it's self-employed money and you take it, you could disqualify yourself, I believe. And Peter might confirm that. But if it's PAYE money, then you might want to structure it on the basis of maybe 1 day a week or post-COVID, because it will, it could have implications for your COVID payment. Now, if they want to pay you over 2 weeks, you can close your COVID payment, take this work, and then reapply when the period of work is finished, reapply for the COVID payment. You could try it that way, because there is no, especially if you're self-employed, that might be useful. But Peter is better versed on the technicalities of that than me.
That feels about right. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with anything there. But you did bring up one thing that I thought might be useful, that is on some people's mind, is if they receive a payment during this period for something that they've already invoiced for, or even hadn't sent out an invoice, but somebody said they were going to pay them and the money pops up in their bank account. I think as long as it can be tied back to an invoice from before the date they cease trading, that shouldn't be an issue. So people shouldn't, if somebody says, listen, I've got that invoice from 6 weeks ago, do you want me to pay you now, or I'm going to get that money to you as soon as I can? Don't resist them paying to you, particularly if you need it, just because you're afraid it might get in the way, because it's tied to the period before.
Okay, great. I'm going to just try and take a few more questions. I'm going to try and summarize a few of these. And we'll find ways of answering more of these questions kind of after this. There is something coming up about music generation as a particular issue, where people are getting a very low hours PAYE contract. And obviously during this time, music generation need to keep the musicians employed. But because they're employed by the local authority by music generation, it's making them really disadvantaged because of the COVID payment. So I think that's just an issue that maybe we need to think about. The 12-week period.
That's complicated, but I could take that question afterwards offline and try to develop it with the person asking it, if that suits.
Brilliant, thanks. We might find a way of passing that on. The 12-week period for the COVID payment, is that from the date you apply or from the introduction of the scheme? It's from the introduction of the scheme, right? Yeah. There's a lot of questions about if you're already on job seekers. I think the situation is that you're on job seekers. We don't have a solution to that yet. Yeah. After the 12 weeks, can you apply for job seekers as self-employed if you've signed a contract for a job that might still happen in October?
Not quite. It's you don't go in and get job seekers as a self-employed person, which is called job seekers benefit. Self-employed, it's not based on work you've lost in the future. It's based on your contributions in the past. And if you basically, if you look back to 2 years ago, 2018, and if you have that minimum PRSI payment of €500 on your self-employed tax return, you should qualify for it. I mean, there's another couple of hoops to go through, but that's the main one.
Great. If you can't be available to work because there's no childcare and you have a child, are you eligible for the COVID payment?
Is this person self-employed or PAYE?
It's not clear.
Yeah, if they're self-employed, they're just applying for it because their trade has ceased. If they're PAYE and they left the work to care for a child because of school or childcare closures, I'm reading this obviously, and your employer is no longer paying you, in some circumstances you may qualify. And there's a number you can ring. It's on citizens' information. Again, I think that you probably look to, are they self-employed in the first place? Just apply for it through that. If they're an employee, apply for it through that. I suspect if they're asking the question, they may not tick either of those two boxes.
Yeah, great. If you leave work to care for a child or an adult, if you take the decision to leave, then that's a difficult situation. If your employer says you must stay at home, then if you're self-isolating, we talked about that, but that's a difficult situation. You may end up having to apply for carers benefit or something instead of COVID.
Yeah, great. Just a few last questions. There's a lot of discussion coming in about a universal living wage and bringing other welfare up to that level. That's a conversation that's happening. It's happening in other countries. I think it's a conversation that's going to continue happening. Someone is getting the COVID payment, the self-employed, and they are receiving the COVID payment. Can they instead apply for the wage subsidy scheme via their company?
Yeah. Revenue or social welfare have come out and said that's no problem. You just need to talk to whoever runs the payroll in the company. There's a set of instructions you need to do, but yeah, that's no problem. You just go on and close your pandemic payment and then run it through the company.
Great. A musician who is Irish and usually based in Ireland, and they're self-employed, but because of the situation, they have to quarantine with their family in the UK.
Depends on where their main base of residence is. Are you employed? Are you a resident of the Republic of Ireland and paying your taxes in the Republic of Ireland? If you're moving between Germany and Ireland, which is your main base of residence, you have to be registered someplace. If you're registered in Ireland, and lost work in Ireland. If you lost the work in Germany, then it's not going to cover you here in Ireland. But if you lost your work in Ireland and you're resident in Ireland, just can't get home, I would say yes, apply for that.
Okay, great. Again, more discussion about framing the argument in terms of universal terms rather than just about special case for the arts. That's really what we're doing. We're looking for arts workers to be treated like other workers. There are a lot of other sectors that have this kind of seasonal work, in the tourist sector, in various sectors, you know, people who've lost work that hasn't happened yet. And I think this is absolutely, this kind of solidarity with other sectors was at the heart of the NCFA statement that was put out last week. And I think you know, we're also engaging with representative bodies from other sectors to ensure that we're doing all this together. Would it be advisable for anyone who hasn't registered as a sole trader to do it now, backdate it to January 2020, and then apply for COVID-19 unemployment payments, saying you can't do your work as a sole trader? This is a question that's come in from a few people.
Yeah, my feeling is that goes back to what I was talking about near the start of my little bit, which is that if that person is legitimately has set up as a sole trader, and perhaps got started a little bit, or can show evidence that they've started a little bit. Now, I see somebody in the chat has mentioned that they were asked to provide invoices of people they dealt with in January, February, March, and they couldn't do it, and they were refused it as a self-employed person on that basis. Now, I haven't had that feedback yet, but somebody has said it. My instinct is that technically, I don't see why that person wouldn't be eligible if they've registered with revenue and genuinely are a sole trader and will continue to be self-employed and generate income as a sole trader or as a self-employed person, in addition to perhaps to PAYE after the pandemic kind of settles down. But I think that if somebody just does it and it's not based in any sort of reality, I think that might be tricky. I think that you possibly might get it technically. They'll just pay it because they seem to be trying to do their best to pay everybody as much as possible. But I just would be afraid that there could be some sort of a clawback. For example, in that situation, that person wouldn't be eligible for job seekers benefit as a self-employed person because they have no self-employed PRSI contributions from a couple of years ago. So, you know, if there's any sort of a tie-in for that at that type of a level, then that person would absolutely not qualify for that type of a payment. So while I could see a situation where that person could get it and actually could continue on and be a self-employed person as 2020 continues, I would be reluctant to do it if it isn't based in some sort of a reality.
Great. A couple of kind of tax things. Does the COVID payment pay a 0, A1 rate of PRSI like job seekers benefit? And will it be taxed only PAYE, or will it be taxed for PRSI and USC as well?
This is the COVID.
The COVID payment, yeah.
This is the pandemic payment or the
pandemic payment, yeah.
I don't think you'll get some sort of. I presume you'll get some sort of a PRSI contribution for the weeks you're on it. I don't think it'll be A1. I think it might be accredited contribution, which are almost as valuable as long as you have enough paid contributions as well. And by almost as valuable, I'm mostly speaking about the state pension, because obviously I don't think you'll be getting job seekers benefit eligibility based on COVID payments. And then the second question was whether or not it would be taxed by USC and PRSI. No, I don't think so. Just income tax.
Great. Someone's just coming in with what does this say? It's very long. Everyone can read it as well. It's just the second last one. Someone twice deny was on casual work, part-time job and freelance work, partially supplemented by job seekers, twice denied the COVID payment because of job seekers, and then this is another case of someone in the Department of Social Protection suspending the job seekers payment so that they can successfully apply for the COVID payment, and the woman actually saying that it is now her job to ring everybody who has been denied but are clearly out of work. So this is interesting. So I think the more people who are expressing that, then this may be a little breakthrough actually right at the beginning, at the very end of this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that's if Karan or Peter, you've heard that from anywhere else.
No, but I must say it's really good. That's twice that's been mentioned in the chat. That's really good. That kind of sounds like a real practical and fair solution to all of this.
But it is for people who were wrongly refused, right? Because if I understand you right, people were working in some shape or form at the time when either their production ceased or their gig was cancelled or the shutdown was called. So they were working in some shape or form, either casual work or freelance work or part-time work. So they would have been wrongly refused, and now the department is rectifying that. This does not help the case of the people who actually weren't on payroll or weren't in a self-employed gig at that point in time. Now the self-employed thing seems to be a bit more straightforward to manage, but certainly if you're a PAYE worker and you weren't on the payroll at around the 13th of March, you won't be getting a phone call to say reapply.
Okay. So a lot of comments coming in saying thanks everyone. This was really brilliant. Regina and Peter and Karan are fantastic. Huge thanks from everybody. There's a request for being able to contact Regina and Karan and Peter after the call. We'll check in with you about what information that we can provide and contact details in terms of if people want to get on. Obviously, we will be putting together all of the information that's been discussed and making it available to you, all the various links. Sorry, my internet connection is unstable. Hopefully it's okay. We'll be putting together information, sending it through next week. We're really grateful for everyone taking the time. We should give a silent clap to the three speakers and everyone who contributed. Thanks so much to Mary Nash and her colleagues from the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, also who've been listening in on the call. And to Anna from Theatre Forum, who's been involved in putting this together, and everyone at the National Campaign for the Arts. Yeah, we will be having more of these sessions as we have more information. We'll also find more opportunities to have more members meetings to discuss the issues as we receive them. Again, I'd encourage anyone who isn't signed up already to the National Campaign for the Arts newsletter to do so through our website, ncfa.ie, so we can keep you updated about the campaign. Check out our website also for media updates, for calls to action about contacting your TDs, because obviously a government is being formed right now and we need to make sure that the needs of the arts sector are on the agenda. Yeah, keep in touch with us on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. Yeah, keep keep the conversation going online and in a socially distant way, and hopefully before long we'll be able to be seeing each other in real space rather than in this virtual space. But until then, we'll do what we can over these Zooms, and we'll continue to together to be as strong as we can and to make sure that we come through this stronger and with hope and with possibility. Thanks everyone, we'll be in touch.
Get in there, please.
Oh yeah, there's a comment. Go on.
Hi,
it's Mark, is it?
Yeah, it's Mark from Palace Project Studios. So I just have a comment in relation to studio rents and that.
Yeah, no problem.
If an arts organisation that provides studios has reduced its revenue, its income by 25% or more, they can claim the wage subsidy for their staff, and that should more than supplement the cost of the rents that they've lost. You know, so as an organisation, we've frozen our rents, and we would hope that other organisations could do the same. You know, because that subsidy is there and it should cover the shortfall, and in which case then artists shouldn't have to pay their studio rents when they're not able to access the studios. You know, so just wanted to make that point. So if artists could contact our studio providers and let them know that that's available, you know, if they don't know. So
that's really fantastic. Yeah, we might follow up with you offline just to get a few lines about that we can include in the information that we're sending out to everybody next week. But that's also a really useful thing to hear, and I think a way forward in terms of that issue. Thanks so much, Mark.
Okay,
thanks
cheers,
so much, everyone.
Thanks for you guys.
See you all again. Bye bye.